Welcome everyone to the second webinar in a series on adapting or adopting curriculum for remote settings. Today's session is specific to pre-kindergarten curriculum. I am Selena Valdez, Director in the Early Childhood Education Division. I am joined by Dr. Lauren Zabinski, Interagency Deputy Director for Early Childhood, and Dana Moyer, Manager of Instructional Materials and Implementation. A quick note on this session and resources. A recording of this webinar and the slides presented will be posted on the Strong Start website tomorrow. There are also many resources to support district planning for the coming year on the TEA COVID Strong Start site. We will reference some of these resources in today's session. In addition, please use the Q&A feature, not the chat, to ask any questions that arise throughout the presentation. We will have time to answer questions at the end of the webinar. In the context of our current reality, the alignment of instruction to the Texas pre-kindergarten guidelines with all students mastering it becomes even more essential. We know that the pandemic and subsequent rapid evolution of school models has further illuminated inequities that have always existed. Students of color, students experiencing poverty, and emerging bilingual students have had less access to rich, engaging instruction at grade level. This was exacerbated in the spring. Teachers have had to perform a daunting task, recreating materials to serve the needs of students across fully in-person, hybrid, and full remote settings. Access to the technology required to engage virtually is varied, and there's an added challenge in providing appropriate remote instruction for young learners, pre-K through second grade, and diverse learners. Given our focus on pre-kindergarten in this session, developmentally appropriate instruction in a remote setting is at the forefront of our considerations. We see that across Texas, every teacher is going to be asking the same two essential questions this fall. How do I make sure all of my students, regardless of their learning environment, experience high quality instruction that is aligned to the Texas pre-kindergarten guidelines? And how do I accomplish that without seeing all or some of my students in person every day? With these questions in mind, we are going to walk you through a possible path forward in the process of answering these questions at your district.
This webinar is the second in a 6-part series on adapting or adopting a remote resilient curriculum. Module 1 presented an overview of what it means to plan for instructional quality, coherence, and continuity. Module 1 materials, including a recording of the webinar, will be posted on the TEA Strong Start website. Following today's session, there will be content-specific sessions for math, reading language arts, science, and social studies. The series will close with an overview of Texas home learning focused on implementation. We will share the link to session materials at the end of the webinar. As a note, this webinar series was developed in collaboration with instruction partners. Our module outcomes for today. We will identify the features of a high-quality pre-kindergarten curriculum and a possible process for reviewing your district materials. We will consider how to adapt pre-kindergarten curricula for remote and asynchronous settings. We will explore a Texas district sample pre-kindergarten distance learning plan. And coming soon, we will have more information about Texas home learning for pre-kindergarten. Today is not an in-depth look at Texas home learning for pre-kindergarten, although we will provide a high-level overview of what's included. We will be able to share more about the materials soon. After today's session, you'll walk away having a better understanding of the high-quality features of pre-K curricula for remote settings and being able to revisit your materials to adapt them or adopt new ones.
We will now explore some of the features of high-quality pre-kindergarten curriculum and additional considerations for remote learning. We know that strong instructional materials for pre-kindergarten are built around integrated content across all 10 domains of the Texas PreK guidelines. We also know that the content is developmentally appropriate, emphasizes health and wellness, language and literacy development, and play, includes support for students with disabilities and English learners, and has progress monitoring for all domains. These features of high-quality pre-kindergarten instructional materials should remain our focus as we consider adapting or adopting new materials for remote learning. There are a few additional considerations as we think about remote learning. Are the materials usable for both on-campus and remote learning? This supports children regardless of their learning environment and supports continuity of learning for children in hybrid settings. Additionally, although family engagement is always important in pre-kindergarten, family supports and usability take on an increased level of importance for remote learning.
Reflecting on the experience for teachers, leaders, and students during distance learning in the spring, we know that there were many challenges. High-quality instructional materials can help solve for some of the challenges faced in the spring. One challenge that we heard from educators across the state of Texas was that teachers who were developing their own curriculum had a difficult time adjusting to remote learning this spring. High-quality instructional materials alleviate the burden of designing lessons so that teachers can focus more on how to adapt their curriculum to work both in person and remotely. They can also better support students with diverse learning needs. Another challenge was that leaders needed to navigate multiple sets of resources to support teachers. High-quality instructional materials can make it easier for principals and coaches to support teachers despite the changing scenarios for teaching and learning. And finally, and perhaps most importantly, a third challenge is that schools are relying on groups of adults for an unprecedented amount of student support, care, and guidance. High-quality instructional materials can provide consistency and predictability for those supporting students, while teachers remain the core instructors. I think we can all agree that high-quality instructional materials are critical to meeting this moment. Given the importance of high-quality instructional materials, there are two paths that you can take to implement them. Adapt your current instructional materials to meet the needs of remote learning, or adopt new materials that better meet your local needs for remote learning. We know that neither of these pathways are easy, but considering what materials that you have, the capacity that you have to adapt them, and whether new materials will better meet your needs will help prepare for remote learning this year. On the screen is a possible framework that you can use to conduct a review of your current instructional materials to see if they meet your needs. First, do your materials align to the key features of high-quality instructional materials for pre-kindergarten that we just discussed? Do they meet the needs for remote learning for pre-kindergarten children, or are there gaps? Based on the gaps, what would need to be adapted to create alignment to the features of high-quality instructional materials and the needs for remote learning? What are the capacity, allocation, and time needs to create alignment? Alternatively, what are my options to adopt? What are the capacity, allocation, and time needs to adopt? We will give a high-level overview of Texas Home Learning at the end of this session, which is one option to consider to meet your local needs. Ultimately, which pathway supports meeting what I want to be true for teaching, learning, and students across all models?
Now we will talk about adapting materials for remote learning in pre-K. Pre-kindergarten is only eligible for funding in the remote asynchronous method for recording attendance. Using the remote asynchronous method for this group of students will allow districts, for example, to provide synchronous instruction in shorter time increments in areas such as foundational literacy practices, mixed with asynchronous learning activities that build in opportunities for student practice, interactions, exercise, and play-based activities. This method also allows LEAs the flexibility to earn daily attendance through an approved plan for providing high-quality instructional practices with daily engagement measures. The LEA's approved instructional plan determines the daily engagement, instructional materials, progress monitoring, and teacher supports the students receive in order to earn daily attendance. Plans should be submitted to the agency by October 1st, 2020. You may be wondering, how does this affect the requirement for full-day pre-K? House Bill 3 requires that all eligible 4-year-old students are served in a full-day pre-kindergarten program, which is 75,600 instructional minutes. It will be important for LEAs to consider this when developing their remote asynchronous plans. If an LEA will not be meeting the full-day requirement, they can request an exemption.
Now that we've discussed the requirements around asynchronous planning for pre-K, let's talk more concretely about adapting your materials for remote learning. There is much to consider when revisiting your pre-kindergarten materials to determine how to adapt them. Pre-kindergarten materials typically cover all domains and have many moving parts, some of which require more adaptation than others for remote learning. We recommend this general framework as a way to consider how to adapt your materials. First, reflect on what you have that could be used for remote learning with few or no adaptations. These are parts of the curriculum that are parent-friendly or that involve few materials or those materials found easily at home. What worked well during spring distance learning? Use this as a foundation for your remote learning materials. For example, the read aloud part of your instructional materials might be easy to provide to families digitally or in print. Next, determine what parts of the curriculum need some adaptations to support home learning. For example, each unit may need a list of materials that are commonly found at home that could be used to support the learning in place of classroom materials. Then consider what supplemental tools might be needed for remote learning. For example, you may need to identify a new parent communication tool if there is not one included with your current materials. Last, adapt the necessary materials for use in the home. Whatever content from the curriculum that you would like families to focus on with teacher support for remote learning, assign district staff or teachers to adapt it for family use. We will explore some further suggestions on how this could be done. And as a note, the TEA reflection tool previously published on the Strong Start website includes some additional questions to support your review and reflection on instructional materials. Now we will look at some of the specific considerations for using pre-kindergarten remotely.
We know from our experience with distance learning in the spring that there are several additional considerations for pre-K curriculum when used remotely. Based on what we have heard from our districts, we have some sample recommendations for how to adapt to meet these considerations. This is not an exhaustive list or required by any means, but meant to serve as suggestions. Consistency is important for this age group. A possible adaptation for a predictable schedule might be to create a child-facing version of a home learning schedule with visuals. This schedule would be adapted to include home routines such as brushing teeth, getting dressed, having breakfast, as well as the learning aspects of the schedule. Also, formative assessment is particularly challenging for pre-K. A possible adaptation for your curriculum could be to set up regular parent check-ins and assign specific activities that parents could photograph and provide anecdotal notes to share with the teacher. We also know that learning centers can be adapted by providing activity ideas that could be done with materials commonly found in the home. Another consideration will be knowledge of developmentally appropriate practices. As students are learning from home, ensuring they are engaging in developmentally appropriate activities can be challenging. Families may have different perspectives around this topic, and one way to make families aware of what is appropriate for this age group is to provide parent-friendly resources on play-based learning. For example, if a teacher will be providing a weekly message through a website, this could be a great place to provide quick tips and resources for parents. Next, we will see some of these adaptations in use through some district examples. As we take a moment to review pre-K remote learning plans, it is important to remember that what we discuss are examples and are meant to provide support, recognizing that districts will pursue options that make the most sense for their local context. To help guide the conversation further on adapting or adopting instructional materials, we will review 2 district examples. This will help us to understand their reflection process on high-quality instructional materials, how they utilize the TEA reflection tool, and identify the unique aspects of pre-K. We are incredibly grateful to PreK for SA for sharing their practice and decisions around their pre-K remote learning plan, providing us here our first district example. PreK for SA educates about 2,000 students every year through its 4 education centers, serving 8 medium to large urban school districts in the San Antonio area. They utilize a common pre-kindergarten curriculum, and teachers leverage this curriculum as the primary resource, supplementing it with texts, activities, home visits, and supports. We will share their approach to remote learning and adapting instructional materials, followed by an additional approach from a district with a different perspective. Let's dive into the decisions that PreK for SA made around their instructional materials. PreK for SA decided to adapt their current materials to better meet the needs of remote instruction. You'll see again here the criteria of high quality instructional materials for pre-K and remote instruction. Upon reviewing their materials, staff determined that they meet the criteria for high quality in several areas. First, developmentally appropriate practices. Second, an emphasis on health and wellness, language and literacy, and play. And finally, supports for students with disabilities and our English language learners. Staff then focused on how to adapt for stronger progress monitoring, usability for both on-campus and remote settings, and additional supports for families. Recognizing that while the most impactful early learning happens in a classroom with highly skilled teachers, PreK for SA is committed to providing that remote learning option for families choosing to do so, maintaining a focus on high quality early learning. This approach includes considerations in the following areas: instructional support, including developmentally appropriate practices, learning through play, virtual class meetings to develop a sense of community, and daily progress monitoring. It also includes considerations in homeschool connection, including teachers working remotely to show what instruction looks like in the home, providing copies of read aloud texts to families, city explorations, and connections to parent liaisons and parents as partners. The approach also includes considerations in instructional staff. So not only a teacher and assistant teacher, but also a dedicated support staff, a specific child to teacher ratio, and support from behavior specialists and instructional specialists. Of course, technology is also a main consideration in providing and supporting communication, a platform to share and allow children and families to contribute to the classroom learning experience, and ongoing professional development and parent trainings. High quality remote learning requires a high degree of planning and organization. In the PreK for SA plan, the lead teacher takes responsibility for this coordination and communication among teachers, support staff, and families. Here we see the components of the PreK for SA plan discussed in the previous slide that provide collaboration and communication with families, as well as helping to increase the usability for families and adult support. Key pieces include virtual parents as partners meeting, a connection to a parent liaison, daily interactions, distributing materials for small group activities, including copies of read aloud text, utilizing the school or district meal pickup process, lesson plans adapted weekly using a format and a language easily understood by the supporting adult in the home, and teachers creating how-to videos and training guides demonstrating the activity in the home setting to support, again, that adaptation of activities from the classroom to the home setting. To support teachers in the progress monitoring process, PreK for SA has asked all families that select remote learning to commit to a daily sign-in, engagement in daily interactions and activities, and weekly phone calls. The teacher will commit to weekly individual calls with each student. And in addition, PreK for SA will provide ongoing parent trainings on technology use and curriculum philosophy to support the remote learning collaboration. We know that there are many types of districts in our state, and the path that the PreK for SA took around adapting their instructional materials may match the needs of some districts, but not necessarily others. So we wanted to profile a different district. This one is hypothetical, but we think that some of you may see your district and considerations around instructional materials in this example. We'll call this District B. District B is a small rural district. There is a common pre-kindergarten curriculum available, but teachers primarily build their own lessons from a variety of resources. When reviewing their materials against the criteria for high-quality pre-kindergarten materials, District B staff determined that their materials were developmentally appropriate, emphasized the right content, including health and wellness, language and literacy, and play, and had some progress monitoring. However, with the current materials, staff at District B determined that there were challenges meeting the needs of diverse learners in a remote setting, and that they had not previously built out robust family supports. Revisiting our framework for adapting or adopting instructional materials, District B considered these gaps and what would be needed to adapt, and ultimately determined that the gaps were outside of their staff's capacity to address. They didn't feel like they could meet the needs of diverse learners and families supporting children at home with their current materials without significant adaptation. Therefore, District B decided to consider a new set of instructional materials that would better meet their local context. In a moment, we will provide an overview of Texas Home Learning, which is one option to consider in lieu of adopting a new set of instructional materials. The key takeaway from sharing these two examples is to recognize how different districts reflected on the key features of high-quality pre-kindergarten curriculum, plus quality features for remote learning, to come to two different conclusions about the best approach to instructional materials in their local context.
We will now give an overview of what is included in Texas Home Learning. Texas Home Learning 3.0 is a freely accessible, optional, aligned suite of resources that educators can use fully or in part to support the new learning environment. Texas Home Learning 3.0 includes curriculum, technology, and professional development. The curriculum is for several content areas pre-kindergarten through 12th grade, aligned to the TEKS or Texas Pre-Kindergarten Guidelines. It is customized for the current learning environment and designed to support the continuity of learning between home and school learning environments. We cannot yet share the specific curriculum or give a preview of the pre-kindergarten materials, but it is coming soon. The technology tools included in Texas Home Learning are a full learning management system designed to support student engagement and instructional collaboration. We will be able to provide information on the LMS today. Texas Home Learning will also include professional development to support educators with implementation in both classroom and remote settings. Districts may optionally adopt none part, or all of the 3 components of Texas Home Learning. Let's dive a little deeper into each of these components of Texas Home Learning. The Texas Home Learning pre-kindergarten program is a comprehensive package. It is an integrative curriculum that includes unit plans and daily lesson plans aligned to the Texas pre-kindergarten guidelines, formative and summative unit assessments, built-in progress monitoring, digital format with printing capability, teacher, student, and family support, and accessibility supports for all learners. Texas Home Learning has been designed to support students learning in any environment, in-person, remote, or hybrid. It can support, again, the continuity of learning between home and school. Moving on to the technology component of Texas Home Learning, Texas Home Learning includes a learning management system. An LMS helps schools, students, and families to keep learning on track, even in a remote environment. Remote learning is hard, and we know that the right technology can be helpful. An LMS allows schools and families to manage student learning to keep kids on track, even at a distance. It brings together teachers, students, parents, and administrators to provide easy access to classes, assignments, grades, and more. And with an LMS, administrators can take a heavy burden off of teachers and staff and save valuable time and money. Ultimately, an LMS helps make measuring student engagement for asynchronous learning plans simple. An LMS helps bring together everything districts and families need to keep students on track, especially with remote learning, including the instructional tools such as the Texas Home Learning curricula, assessment management, systems management, data analytics, communication, and collaboration. TEA has negotiated a statewide license for Schoology for all interested districts for 2 years. Districts must begin using Schoology anytime between today and March 1st, 2021 to benefit from this license. The license allows for integration with existing platforms, the forthcoming Texas Home Learning instructional resources, and other products as needed. And I encourage you to learn more about the Texas Home Learning LMS on the TEA Instructional Continuity webpage, or sign up at www.powerschool.com/Texas if you are interested. The last component of Texas Home Learning is professional development. There will be support to implement remote learning, the instructional materials that are part of Texas Home Learning, and using the learning management system. ESCs will also support implementation and training for Texas Home Learning. We're going to close the webinar with some suggested actions, upcoming webinars in this series, resources, and then a question and answer period. So what's next after leaving this webinar? If you're looking for some possible next steps in reconsidering your instructional materials, see the suggested actions on the screen. Ground yourself in data and review district survey data from the spring on remote learning to inform your approach. Assign staff who will be responsible for reviewing curriculum and providing ongoing implementation support and development. Review your instructional materials for pre-kindergarten through the lenses of high-quality materials and remote instruction that we discussed today. And if needed, review the Texas Home Learning 3.0 materials when they are available to see if they may meet your local needs. For resources and up-to-date information, please visit the COVID-19 Support Instructional Continuity Planning page of the Texas Education Agency website. Included there are Texas Home Learning and Strong Start resources and announcements. On the Strong Start page, you'll find the materials referenced in this session, including the reflection tool, sample school models for pre-kindergarten, and very soon, a recording of this webinar. The next webinars in this series are content-specific sessions on adapting math, reading language arts, science, and social studies curricula. Next Friday, August 7th, there will be a webinar on implementing Texas Home Learning 3.0. And again, all materials will be on the Strong Start page.
All right, now we'd like to take some time to answer any questions from today's webinar. Remember to use the Q&A feature and not the chat box. So I'll go ahead and start with a question that came in. We have been told that LEAs may not submit a full day waiver if they have already implemented full day and did not previously seek a waiver. How will this impact the information shared on slide 13 for the 75,000 minutes and funding for the asynchronous only with regard to remote learning? So actually, LEAs who did not apply for a waiver last year and were able to implement full day, they can request a waiver or an exemption from full day pre-K for the first time this year. So yes, you may submit for a full day waiver.
We got a question on, is there a sample schedule for pre-kindergarten home learning anywhere on the TEA website? And I strongly encourage you to look at the Strong Start page and at the sample school models. There are full slide decks there that include sample schedules for pre-kindergarten home learning there. We're getting several questions about both the PowerPoint, the recording, and any materials from this session. And all of them will be posted on the Strong Start page of the TEA website. Got a couple people asking for the link. I'm wondering if Leslie's on, if you could grab the link and put it in the chat and the Q&A, that would be really helpful.
Yes, I'll go ahead and do that.
Thank you.
We also have a question here on how will teachers be available for phone calls if they are teaching class for students that do come in person. It's important to note that the examples that we gave here are options and meant to help to pursue some options for districts. There are also examples for a fully remote option. More information and guidance for a hybrid model is coming and will be posted on this same link that is being shared in the chat box.
I know we're getting a lot of questions about when will materials be available. We are expecting the beginning of August, and we'll be updating as soon as we're able about what content and who the providers are as soon as we were able to. We have another question about the print option for that was similar to 1.0 and 2.0 for Texas Home Learning. We'll be sharing information as we're able to in the beginning of the next month regarding the specifics for THL3.
Got a question about, will pre-kindergarten students receive printed packets delivered to their homes, similar to they did with Texas Home Learning 1.0 and 2.0? That's a great question. Earlier this year, Texas Home Learning 1.0 and 2.0 gave the option of getting printed packets shipped directly to homes through a vendor that TEA organized. For Texas Home Learning 3.0, that would be more on the district on how you would want to choose to use the Texas Home Learning materials and what you would want to print and provide to families. Got a question on, can an LMS other than Schoology be used with Texas Home Learning 3.0? And then a related question, just wanting to know more about Schoology. I'm wondering if Melissa or Leslie, if you want to jump in with some answers on the LMS there.
I don't know if Leslie's a panelist. I'd have to make her a panelist. But I think Tyson, if you're on, you might be able to be. Hold on one second, Dana.
Yeah, I'm happy to.
Thanks, Tyson.
Yeah, happy to jump in on the LMS side. So part of the first question of can an LMS other than Schoology be used? Yes, absolutely. All the THL content is basically going to be able to be imported through LTI configuration, which is the most common configuration for a lot of learning management systems. So should be kind of easily adaptable into a variety of different platforms. A lot of the THL content will also not depend on a learning management system to be able to be used. So some of the material will be digitized and kind of available to be put into a different format. Like if you're using a Google Classroom or a file sharing system, you know, some of the material can be in PDFs. You also could use it in some cases. Some of the providers that we're finalizing actually have also digitally native platforms. So while it can be exported into the LMS, you can also kind of just head to the website, if you will, of the provider once it's finalized, and you can just access the material digitally there too. So there will be ways to access the material through different means that are best for the district to be able to have access to the different content, both through an LMS that's their own or through the LMS in Schoology. I think the second question was Schoology, learning more about Schoology. So we have powerschool.com/Texas, I believe is the place to head for learning more about the Schoology product. In there, you'll find an opportunity to sign up for the product if you want it, but then also there's a webinar coming up on Thursday. The date and time are posted on that website, powerschool.com/Texas. And there's also going to be a product video that's coming, I believe, this week. So that should also be up there pretty soon to be able to see a demo and kind of look and poke around and get a better understanding of what's included in the Schoology LMS product.
Thank you, Tyson.
There's also a question about this being a pre-K new adoption year, and yes, that is correct. The adopted materials are scheduled to go into classrooms in the 21-22 school year.
There's also a question on will the pre-K curriculum be in Schoology, or will teachers need to put the lessons in the Schoology platform? So we believe that we will be able to have import support by the district based on its interest in having a certain curriculum that's in Texas Home Learning be in Schoology. So Schoology is kind of working with our curriculum providers to say if a district wants this, they can help support that migration into the Schoology platform. So therefore teachers should not need to put those into there if the district is saying like, hey, we want this imported into the platform, and Schoology can then help support it. If it's not, if on the other hand, a district wants other solutions in there that aren't necessarily THL 3.0, Schoology won't necessarily be able to do that for them, but they will certainly help in the implementation and make it as simple as possible working with their technical teams.
There's also a few questions about how to take daily attendance remotely with pre-K students. And so I am actually taking a look at the guidance document on the student attendance and enrollment. And what it states in there is that if the LEA has an approved remote asynchronous plan with students participating in both synchronous and asynchronous classes, the student's attendance recorded by the teacher in the synchronous class can count for official attendance for funding purposes.
Got a question on who is writing the lessons for Texas Home Learning. Tyson, do you want to answer that one?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's again with the answer on the vendor. So we'll be able to, give more information on that once we kind of have that clarity and can share it along with that timeline. Is similarly, note that the review process that we have for all of the materials is very thorough. So when we say right, we also mean like a collaborative process that involves folks who are Texas teachers being involved, review teams that are also including Texas teachers, some parents as well that are kind of having a role in doing this. So it's not a single author, with one person. It is obviously a lot of folks who are involved in this. And then we know that this is a continuous kind of improvement and review process, given the speed at which we're trying to get materials out. So we are actually actively encouraging, folks here are going to have full transparency into the materials. They'll be widely available across Texas. People can look at them. If folks see things, that they think needs to change or have contributions, we're going to have an active way to receive that feedback on an ongoing basis to be able to make adjustments that fit best for Texas teachers and students and parents. So it really is a matching with the speed of the need for the school year, along getting the highest quality we possibly can, but still making it with the flexibility to continuously improve as we go. See a question also here on, is the Schoology price point going to be lower after the 2-year free paid period? The answer is that we can't guarantee what the pricing will be in the end, because that will be something that an individual district would work out. I can say that we will be happy to try and play a role, right? And Schoology has every incentive to retain customers and make sure that they're doing right by folks, to be able to make sure that they can keep up the support that they have for the state. So we'll do what we can to make sure that we help leverage the best possible price for folks. We won't be able to have probably a formal agreement, beyond the 2-year agreement that we have, but want to make sure that we can at least try and exert what we can to be able to support districts on making sure that pricing is as good as possible.
I have a question about balancing teachers taking phone calls with students learning remotely and then also teaching in person. And all of that would be up to local choice and local decision. I highly encourage you to look at the Strong Start page for some sample school models and planning tools to support in that planning process.
Hey y'all, this is Andrew. Wanted to jump in. Saw a question on about, does it make a difference if our district already has Schoology for the upper grades? Through this license, your district will have the option to essentially pause your current license and then take advantage of the two-year funding by TEA to pay for it. So you think of it like an extension for 2 years to your current license. And then on the topic of Schoology and coming back to something Tyson was talking about earlier, which is the Schoology webinar that will be tomorrow for district folks. That webinar will be at 2 o'clock Central Time. And if you want to sign up for that, again, echoing, just go to powerschool.com/Texas.
So your question about, will THL continue for virtual students if we go back to face-to-face at any point and transitioning? So the answer to that is for sure, yes. The material is all being built for continuity between different environments. So, given that there's a lot of uncertainty with how long schools may be open and in what grade levels and all that sort of thing, the ideal in the materials is that they actually provide the maximum flexibility for learning in person or learning remotely, and are designed to be used contiguously. So I would say they're going to be great high quality solutions and tools to use that aren't just for remote learning, although they are I think going to be good for that. And continue to also be good solutions for classroom learning, even on their own right. Will Schoology be available kind of independent of THL? Yes. So also want folks to know that this is a full buffet style meal here. You can take any piece you want and leave any piece you want. So none of it is a package. It really is up to you how you want to deploy or use it. So I say, I want Schoology, but I want none of THL. Great. I want just one grade of math, but I don't want anything else. Great. You know, it really is kind of yours to deploy and use as you see fit.
I just want to clarify again on the pre-K waiver. So yes, if a district was able to provide full day last year, and now given the circumstances that we're in, they are not able to provide full day this year, then yes, they may request for an exemption for full day pre-K.
Got a question about using a different LMS versus Schoology, using one for pre-K2 and one for 3-5. Absolutely possible. Again, Texas Home Learning is optional. You can adopt any or none of it for any grade level to meet your local needs.
Tyson, I think you might have answered this already, but Schoology and Clever compatibility.
Yeah, both
Yes.
compatible. Yeah, Schoology is compatible with a kind of a large amount of different types of third-party resources technologically. Again, I don't have the full list here, and nor am I, frankly, the technical expert on that. But yeah, thanks, Andrew. I think there's kind of information on kind of how the partnerships are there and what things they interface with. Again, Schoology and Texas Home Learning, you know, not required to be together, and anyone can implement them independently. And by the way, the two free years deal with Schoology is also, it doesn't come with a requirement to implement Texas Home Learning resources necessarily. So all of these things are independent.
Got a question about ESC support for implementation of Texas Home Learning and what supports we can anticipate for ESCs to support districts that elect to use Texas Home Learning. And unless Melissa wants to add anything, I think there's more to come on that, and looking forward to collaboration on that. Melissa, do you want to add anything there?
I think that's really all. We're continuing to work with the ESCs to see how they can best support districts as we roll out additional information about Texas Home Learning. So more to come, and we'll be sharing it on our website as soon as we're able to.
Got a
question. Yeah.
Oh, go ahead, Andrew.
See a question on Seesaw. Is Seesaw an LMS? Is it considered an LMS? As far, my understanding of Seesaw is that it's not a learning management system, but it is, I would think, like the way that the folks on the call described it earlier, is your learning management system brings in all of these other things. So you got your school information systems, you have some engagement tools like a Seesaw, you have some other instructional tools, you have attendance management, you have all these things that you all have to deal with that are incredibly difficult, especially in a remote setting. Learning management system pulls all of those things together to make it easier on you. And so a Seesaw wouldn't be an LMS, Google Classroom wouldn't be an LMS. All of those things they do parts of school, right? Like they help you with parts of learning. The learning management system, Schoology, is designed to pull all of those parts into one common space so that it's easier for you to manage it. And this includes TechCIS as well and other student information systems.
We got a question on the daily requirement for full day pre-K virtual is 180 instructional minutes. Is that correct? Selena or Lauren, can you confirm that?
Sorry, for the instructional minutes for pre-K, it's best to look at the resource for the remote settings. There is an example there of the schedule for fully remote along with the guidance there in that slide deck. And again, that's all found in what we have been referencing today with the reopening guidance and strong start.
But just to clarify, it's my understanding that it's not a requirement for the 180 minutes. I think that was a recommendation in those slides. Is that correct, Lauren? So the minutes would be based on what the LEA submits for their asynchronous plan.
Correct.
While Lauren's checking that, Selena, there's another question on the waiver. Does that mean, since all our area schools are beginning virtually, does that mean all pre-K schools will have to apply for the full day waiver?
Yes, that's pretty much what it's looking like. So that is correct.
I think we got some questions on requests for additional guidance on developmentally appropriate technology tools and also on transitioning back to in-person instruction safely. I think I would bookmark the instructional continuity page and the Strong Start page within that and just continue to check back for additional resources as we're able to provide them. Got a question on, is there a cost to the district for printing? I'm guessing this is if you choose to adopt Texas Home Learning and want to share printed materials, that would be a district cost to provide printing.
Okay, so I'm going to clarify one more time about the pre-K waiver. In statute, it is required that 4-year-old pre-kindergarten students receive 75,600 minutes. So if your district, whether virtually or in person, is not able to meet that minute requirement, then yes, you would need to apply for the full day exemption. I hope that makes it a little clearer.
Got a question, is there a separate webinar for remote learning 3.0? I think that means Texas Home Learning 3.0. Please correct me if I'm wrong with another question. But there is a webinar just on implementing Texas Home Learning 3.0. It will be next Friday, August 7th at the same time as this one from 10 to 11 a.m. And again, the registration is the same place where you registered for today's webinar, and all recorded materials will be posted. There's a question on getting a link to the registration for Texas Home Learning. We don't have that yet because we have not announced the products for Texas Home Learning yet, but if you go to the link that I chatted on instructional continuity planning, you can find both the Strong Start and Texas Home Learning pages. And that's where you can find the most up-to-date information about Texas Home Learning. We'll be posting information as it's available. I think we're about at time here. So I just want to say thank you so much for everybody who participated in today's webinar. Thank you for your questions. I'm going to leave you with 2 email addresses where you can direct more questions if they're not answered on the Strong Start and Texas Home Learning pages that we linked. Texas Home Learning specific questions can go to texashomeLearning@tea.texas.gov. And if you have questions specific to pre-kindergarten, not about Texas Home Learning, that could go to early childhood education at tea.texas.gov. Again, thank you for your participation, for everything you do for kids across Texas, and have a wonderful day.